What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, August 28th, 2017. And unfortunately, just as we started the show, our server for whatreallyhappened.com came under intense hacker attack. They always wait just when I'm getting ready to do the show, and then they'll come on in. And they have succeeded in crashing the site. So they know that we're a one-person operation. If I have to do the show, then I can't go in and deal with all of this. So obviously something is going on where people are very concerned that you not be allowed to hear certain things. So there we are. Anyway, it is Monday, August 28th, 2017. Start of a brand new week and all kinds of insane stuff going on there. And the good news, of course, is you probably noticed on the fade up here, I finally got the new mixer installed here. And for those of you on BAM User, this is the old mixer. And it's already been spoken for, so don't send in any emails. So that's going to be shipped out this afternoon. Okay, my server just came back. The automated systems work. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. All right, so let's get into it. We've got so much to talk about today. In fact, I got a very full talking points list here, and we're just going to tear right into it right now here. Obviously, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room. And even there at Round Rock, Texas, where RBN's hub is located, they're still feeling the wrath of Hurricane Harvey. This is a monster storm. There's absolutely no question about it. It is a monster storm. And they're looking at an unprecedented 50 inches of rain. And they're saying that the rain is going to continue for days to come. Now, the center of the storm has sort of wandered back toward the east along the coast of Texas. And those poor people in Louisiana who still have not fully recovered from Hurricane Katrina, they're now getting a huge amount of rain and weather. And everybody's saying, why were we not prepared for this? And, of course, the Houston government is out there saying, well, this is a once every 500-year flood. I mean, you can't expect us to be dealing with all of that. But, they said exactly the same thing when they got caught with heavy flooding last year and the year before. So it's really out of control over there. And as a matter of fact, Texas has activated all 12,000 of their National Guardsmen in response to this Harvey devastation. And so it is really ugly over there. The hurricane has managed to shut down major U.S. oil refineries. They're already talking shortages. They're predicting major price hikes. And, of course, we're still not hearing how many of those offshore oil platforms were damaged and may even now be leaking here. So that's going to have an impact. One of the big headaches everybody's dealing with is 911 in the Houston area is not responding. And, in fact, people are turning to social media to plea for help over what's going on there. And police right now in Houston are saying anybody who has a boat to help rescue people. And they're just connecting over social media. And they're now starting to compare Hurricane Harvey to Hurricane Katrina. Now, here's where politics really begins to show its ugly head here. Because apparently there was a photo that came on out showing some of these people in Texas in an airboat. And the people driving the airboat are white, and they're helping a black family out of the water into the airboat. So far, so good. It's what you expect from down in Texas, where people have a strong sense of community. But on the airboat, on the steering vane behind the propeller, there's painted a Confederate flag, and surprise, surprise, the Hillary people just went ballistic. There was this tweet put out by Logan Anderson, who I'm given to understand is a Hillary supporter, saying, I can't believe that they're having this Confederate flag out there. How dare they? And people were coming back and saying, all right, so if you're standing in the water and you're drowning, are you not going to get on the boat because of the flag? And Logan Anderson said, I would absolutely get on that boat. And then when they drop me off, I'd tear off the flag and drop it into the flood. Kind of hard to do. Like I said, it's painted on the steering vane of the boat. But for people to just exploit this politically is totally out of control. All right, we're going to take a phone call. James in South Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I want to talk about the Bernie Sanders lawsuit that was thrown out last week.
It strikes me as kind of I'll tell you what, could you call back in like hour number 2, because I want to stay kind of focused on the hurricane news. All right, and we'll do that here. All right, okay. Now, there was a photo that came on out, went viral, was all over the media, and it shows residents of this assisted living facility in Dickinson, Texas, literally sitting in their home up to their waists in water because the police said, we just can't get there. We cannot get to you. And the photo, turns out, was taken by the owner of the assisted living facility and spread all over social media in order to prompt a public outcry that something be done. And yes, in point of fact, these people have now been rescued. So, again, social media is beginning to show what an incredible resource it has turned into. It is able to coordinate rescue efforts much more quickly and efficiently than the... Well, like I said, the 911 system is completely down. We're going to shout out to all our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And people are starting to ask a question. Why wasn't Houston evacuated before Hurricane Harvey? Because it's not like this has not happened before. And so everybody's saying, why did the mayor not call for an evacuation? And Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner is saying that, well, as near as they could figure, if they ordered an evacuation of the entire Houston area, you were going to see more people at risk caught out in the open than if they stayed at home and they had the resources of their home to deal with. And unfortunately, it's one of those situations. I'm feeling very sorry for the Houston mayor. It's a darned if you do and darned if you don't situation. You call for an evacuation, people get caught by the flood in the open, a lot of people die. Or you don't call for the evacuation, people are still dying. It's a no-win situation. And I think we ought to cut the mayor a little slack on this one here. Now, somebody else has made a very good point that we should keep in mind. We posted this YouTube video where a prepper was doing a report about Hurricane Harvey and saying that this is where you find out where being a prepper is the difference between surviving one of these incidents and not surviving. And in point of fact, that prepping is some of the best insurance you can buy for your life and safety. One of the problems that they've hit is that the floodwaters have contaminated the municipal water supplies. They've had to shut them off because all kinds of toxic runoff has now flowed into the system. They're going to have to clean it out before they can start it up again. So people who stored water are going to be okay. People who didn't are going to be in trouble. I think this hurricane, along with Katrina, along with a lot of other things, should underscore the fact that the government is really not able or even that interested in taking care of ordinary people. So you should be prepared. One of the things I admire about the Mormons, it's literally built into their religion to have a huge supply of food, storable food, water, everything, constantly on hand. And I don't know why you need a religious dictate to do it, but at least they're prepared. Now, the flooding is so bad, they actually shut down the Johnson Space Flight Center in Houston. Now, the people who are in mission-critical staff for the space station and such were brought in, but everybody else was told to stay home because it's in the inundation zone. So this is a nasty one, and it's about to get a little bit worse in two specific areas because apparently there are 2 Houston reservoirs which have reached the point of overtopping. And so the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is going to start releasing water from the Addicks and Baker dams into Buffalo Bayou, which is the main body of water running through Houston. And yes, they're saying this will result in more homes being flooded, but it's a decision between flooding a few homes and risking the collapse of the dams and flooding a lot more homes. So again, it's a no-win situation. Now, President Trump is going to visit the hurricane-torn area tomorrow on Tuesday. And if that's simply going to mean he's going to fly over an Air Force One and wave out the window, we don't really know. Everybody's already signed the appropriate disaster declarations, and these people are having a really, really hard time down there. And in the middle of it all, and it gets really, really disgusting, yes, there's looting going on. Come on, people. You're supposed to be Texans. You're supposed to be community-oriented. Of course, maybe these aren't Texans who are doing the looting, but apparently a lot of televisions are being liberated during this whole thing. And as if they have not had enough problems already, there is a new tropical storm, Irma, that could form off the southeast coast of Carolina. And they've already issued the tropical storm watches for the Carolina coast. It's not nice to fool Mother Nature. All right, let's get off the hurricane here and get into the politics. Very interesting article came out of Global Research up in Canada. The structure of power in American society, a military junta is now ruling the United States. And we know that when the Founding Fathers set up the country, they set it up with a federal government that was split into parts to keep an eye on each other. But in more recent decades, we've seen those three branches of government start to act like they should be in charge. We've had the Supreme Court rewriting the law and the Constitution from the bench. We have Congress overriding the White House on the wars. And more people are beginning to realize the fact that Donald Trump has been brought to heel on the war agenda says that effectively we're being ruled by a military junta that thinks war is the solution to all of their problems. Okay, we're going to take a phone call. George from Texas, aloha. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? My weekend wasn't so good. Right now I'm in Houston. I'm looking outside, 24 stories up on a hospital building because I had a medical emergency. I had to go to ER down in Brazoria County. They shipped me up to Houston before the roads were closed. But I could say one thing right now. It's more like I'm looking all around. I'm seeing helicopters rescuing people, and the city's pretty busy here.
I can imagine. And anybody who is in a position where your home and your family is safe and you've got an airboat or something, lend a hand. This is where everybody has to pull together. You can't just sit and say, hey, the government's coming to get us. Remember, and FEMA's doing a much better job this time than they did in Katrina. But remember how bad a job they did in Katrina. This is a good textbook example of developing that sense of community and looking out for each other. George, by any chance you have a camera in your cell phone?
Yes.
I hope you'll take pictures for us.
All right. Well, Mike, I got one more thing. About the politics in this rescue thing, I don't care if you hate Trump, love Trump. Put politics aside and put the people first for once.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. I'm appalled at some of the stuff I'm seeing out there. Where there was another Twitter chain that was going on about, well, it's a red state. Let them sort this mess out for themselves. And come on. I mean, if you are so obsessed with politics that you are no longer a functional member of society, then you probably ought to be locked up somewhere.
Well, I got to tell you one thing. The hospital, I'm in a hospital bed right now, but I'll get out of my bed and take pictures. But anyway, I got to say one thing. The hospital staff, the order is from the state is nobody can be admitted to the hospital. Nobody can leave. Even though I might be well enough to be discharged, I have to stay.
Yes.
The nurses have been working around the clock. They haven't been able to go home to their families. The people who are supposed to come in are not able to come in. So it's more like I got to give my hats off to nurses and doctors. They're doing their best under trying conditions.
I'm hearing that from all over the state, that everybody is trying to pitch in there, except for the obvious liberal snowflake opportunists who are trying to make political hay off of this. Listen, I take back my comment about taking pictures. If you're in a hospital bed and you're supposed to stay in the hospital bed, then you take care of yourself first. I mean, there's a huge number of photos out there on social media already. Okay, so you just take care of yourself.
Well, the doctor told me I have to get up and stretch my legs anyway.
Oh, okay. All right.
If I got a catheter in me, so.
Oh, well, we didn't need to hear that part.
Anyway, Mike, like I say, we're Texans. We can, like I say, the storm will not break us no matter what.
Well, absolutely not. And at least the good news is the drought is now, I think, pretty much over and done with here. Listen, you get better, you feel better, and get well, and get back to just being a regular Georgian Texas caller, okay?
All right. Well, thank you, Mike.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Okay. Well, that's George in Texas. He's a regular caller to the show, and I was unaware that he was dealing with a medical crisis. And I know what that feels like from just a few years ago myself here. Now, getting on back to the for all intents and purposes, the rest of the world is now seeing the United States run by a military junta that has basically usurped the power of the executive, the legislative, maybe even the judicial. Look at all the war crimes they're committing. And this might be a good reason or a good explanation for why Trump is walking back into Afghanistan, which has been a quagmire for the United States for 16 years and has been the ruin of other empires throughout history, going all the way back to Alexander the Great. So, getting onto the war zones, though, over in Syria, barring the unexpected, it looks like Syria really is pretty much over. Apparently in southern Raqqa, there was a clash between ISIS and the Syrian army, and ISIS suffered large numbers of casualties. And apparently over 800 ISIS members, along with 13 battle tanks and 39 pickup trucks armed with large caliber machine guns, 9 mortars and artillery guns, were destroyed during the clashes near Ghanam al-Ali village. And the ministry added that the Syrian military are now advancing against ISIS along the Euphrates River. So, even the former U.S. ambassador to Syria is saying Assad is won. This is Robert Ford. You have to get used to it. Syria and Assad are going to be there. It's time for you to just sort of deal with that reality in an adult-like fashion. Now, unfortunately, there are those who absolutely adamantly will not allow Syria to remain in the control of the Syrian people and the Syrian government. And so, not too surprisingly, we're starting to see in the corporate media repeats of the same weapons of mass destruction lies all over again. Oh, they've got weapons of mass destruction. They've got gas. They've got this. They've got that. And it's like the carbon copy. They went back and they got all the videotapes for the propaganda used to sell us the war in Iraq, and they just dubbed in Syria instead of Iraq. There's no other difference. There is no other difference. But we're starting to see the media get all these articles to say, oh, Syria's bad. We can't let that go. We can't let Syria fall back into the control of the Syrian people. Now, Netanyahu is waiting on in trying to get this war restarted. Remember last Friday, they were talking about how Saudi Arabia and Israel might just go ahead and directly intervene. All they need is an excuse, and today Netanyahu is out there pushing that excuse. He's accusing Iran of building missile production factories in Syria and Lebanon. Let's rope them all in one group and go after them all the time. And Netanyahu is out there claiming Iran is planning to use Syria as a base for military entrenchment for its goal to eradicate Israel. Now, Israel has been accusing Iran of all kinds of things for 30 years now. They're just weeks away from a nuclear weapon. They're going to start a new Holocaust. They're, genocide against the Jews everywhere, although the Jews who live in Iran seem to find it very, very comfortable there. Now, the deputy foreign minister over in Iran is saying this is complete nonsense. We're not involved in Iran. There's no missile factory. It's just all completely made up, which we know Israel has a tendency to do. Because if you remember the propaganda run-up to the war in Iraq, Israel was at the forefront of saying Iraq's got this and Iraq's got that and they're dangerous. Our Mossad is absolutely convinced that Iraq is going to do all these horrible things. And even though Netanyahu's bluff is being called on this, we are hearing from Israel that if Iran expands in Syria, they will directly attack Bashar al-Assad's palace. And apparently Israel is warning Russia to stay out of the way. So this, unfortunately, is not over in Syria quite yet. We're going to take a break for commercials. When we come on back, we got a caller waiting on the line. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And I misspoke at the top of the show. Apparently, Mike is not in our studio today. It's Dan who's now running tech on my show for today. So when you call in, just say, hi, Dan. Speaking of calling on in, Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Hey, Mike. You know how the media, they just hate Trump so much that I think there was a couple, like before the storm, Salon.com ran a story, like it came out and says Donald Trump flunked this storm before it started, so they hate them even before the storm started.
Oh.
They'll just find any excuse to hate them. You know, that's these groups of people. Plus the Antifa rioting in Berkeley, I don't see them lifting a finger to help the people in Texas. You know, they're just a bunch of scumbags.
Yeah, and it is. And somebody just sent me another Twitter feed where apparently some of the people who are doing the looting in the flood zones are they're bragging about it on Twitter. And apparently this individual named Jerome Williams tweeted out, "Please only loot white-owned stores and stores owned by Trump supporters." I mean, come on. How childish can you get?
Hey, Mike, I don't know if you talked about this yet, switching topics on that Bulgarian investigative reporter woman that uncovered that link between Silkway Airlines.
We're going to get into that in a little bit.
Okay, I just want to also mention a company called Purple Shovel.
Yes.
That's a subcontractor for the CIA, which helps train terrorists. And there's two others, Orbital KKG or something, and another company. So there's a lot of these guys out there. They'll do anything for dough.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many companies are out there are actually fronts for the CIA. There was that one that was Brewster Jennings and Associates that got outed during that whole Valerie Plame situation. Believe it or not, the Foder's Travel Guides is a CIA proprietary, and they use it to grant cover for people to go into countries and look around. And it works really well because, people say, "Oh, you're from the Foder's Travel Guides." Yes, come on in. Let us show you around. We'll show you all the interesting things to put in the guides. And they actually do produce, in my opinion, the best travel guides that are out there.
And then switching gears again, while it's still on Syria, how they got one of the beer factories up and running again, which is great news for their economy.
Yes, it is. Okay?
Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And getting on back here, we are hearing now that Red Cross facilities all along the East Coast are already sending their warehoused resources down to Texas. It's all on its way. They're moving in. We're not going to see a repeat of what happened following Katrina. All the necessary resources are on the way, which doesn't mean that if you have something that you can send along, go ahead and help them out. All righty, getting on back to the war zones. Russia has deployed 2 brand new diesel-electric submarines, said to be the quietest in their class, to the Mediterranean to support the Black Sea Fleet's task force operating off the coast of Syria. And these are very, very quiet submarines. They're much quieter than nuclear boats. Nuclear boats, those reactors make a lot of racket. Now, apparently, the Saudi emir of ISIL terrorists was killed in a popular uprising in eastern Syria. This is a new development. The Syrian people have had enough of this nonsense. And apparently, according to local sources, just this crowd attacked this guy's car in southeastern Deir ez-Zor and just killed him. So it's definitely looking like Syria is going to remain the property of the Syrian people here. Now, this is the story that Dustin was alluding to here. There's a Bulgarian reporter who uncovered evidence that the United States and its allies, notably Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, have been using Azerbaijan's Silk War Airlines to ferry entire plane loads of weapons to Syrian militants under the disguise of being diplomatic cargo so they wouldn't be inspected. We're going to take another break for commercials here, and we'll be back with more on this story. Anyway, so we're talking about this Bulgarian reporter who uncovered that the United States, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, say that 3 times fast, have been using Azerbaijan's Silk War Airlines to ferry entire plane loads of weapons to the Syrian militants. Some of these weapons have wound up in the hands of the Nusra Front, which is supposed to be the really, really bad guys. They're not the moderates. And this reporter documented some 350 different flights, all labeled diplomatic flights, so that they wouldn't be searched. and they were just loaded with weapons. And these weapons are bought from all kinds of Eastern European countries to disguise their origin, and she blew the whistle on that. So, first of all, you will note that this story has not appeared anywhere in the U.S. corporate media. Meanwhile, the reporter, Dilyana Gaitan-Shiva, I think, wrote the report for Trud newspaper, and apparently she has now been both interrogated and fired for running that story, linking the CIA and these Syrian weapons flights. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Ed in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I just wanted to talk about the looting. I'm old enough to remember the lootings in New Jersey back in the late 60s, early 70s, and I can remember when the National Guard were posted at strategic points to make sure the rioters didn't pass into certain neighborhoods. And certain mayors and governors did give the order shoot to kill, which kind of deterred a lot of the people from rioting. Now, this town called Asbury Park, I don't know if you've ever heard of it or not. It used to be a very famous resort town up until the riots in 71. They burnt down at least 40% of the town. Main Street was totally burnt except for one store. You want to take a guess on what that one store was that they didn't burn down?
Please enlighten us.
A liquor store.
Yeah, I can see the rationale behind that. I remember the looting that took place following the Rodney King verdicts out in Los Angeles, and the amazing thing was that the people who were doing the looting in South Central didn't live there. There were people that were literally driving down from the San Fernando Valley to go on a looting spree, and I know that because the managers of the apartment where we lived at the time had gone on down there, and we just happened to run into them coming back, and they got cases and cases of liquor, and they're out to say, take one. And it was just kind of a little weird to see that. But again, I look at the behavior of these people taking advantage of the situation, either the looters or the politicians, and I'm not the only person appalled by this. There's an article that just came out of Investment Watch blog about have we lost our humanity? Social media comments about Hurricane Harvey victims get nasty, and they do. And it's another sign of the deterioration of our society, where we've lost our cohesiveness. And, of course, a big part of that is deliberately induced. We have a government that, in order to consolidate in its own power, actively works to split the American people into these violent, occasionally, factions against each other. And it surfaces during these crises when we should all be pulling together to help our fellow American in this time of need, and instead people are out there screaming about the Confederate flag on the airboat that's rescuing black people. Who cares? And it shows the extreme pettiness of some of these political activists.
I miss the day when candidates would run on law and order. That's what you need in order to maintain a society. Not charity, not compassion, but law and order. Those are the top two, because without those, there is no compassion, there is no charity. And I just wanted to say before I let you go, Mike, I really enjoy your show. And also remember those Koreans on top of the rooftops of their stores in South L.A. as they were shooting the potential looters?
Yeah, I remember that.
When somebody from California asks me, why do you need a semi-automatic rifle? I point that out.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because when the rioting broke out in South Central, the LAPD ran, and people were just left to protect their own stores from the looters and burners, and those people who didn't have guns ran smack up into the California's 2-week waiting period, and then on top of all that, the LA City Council put a ban on all ammunition sales within Los Angeles County. And, of course, that immediately created a black market of people driving down to Orange County, loading up their car with ammunition, bringing it back and selling it at a 200-300% markup.
Well, I think I moved to Florida 10 years ago. The gun laws here are constitutional, and we really don't have to worry about rioting, if you get my point.
Yes.
And a lot of the towns around here. Because, every 4th of July, every New Year's Eve, you could hear the gunshots going off. And, of crime rate's at a minimal here, so it's safe for now, but who knows? 10 years from now?
Yeah,
5 years from now? A year from now?
I'm having trouble seeing this country still intact a year from now, to be very honest. Anyway, Ed, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here.
Thanks a lot.
All right, and getting on back to the war zone, once again, the United States has been caught evacuating ISIL commanders from Deir ez-Zor ahead of the Syrian army's rapid advances. The Syrian army is closing in on these terrorists, and you have the U.S. evacuating them, flying them out in helicopters. I guess they need these guys alive to drop into the Philippines to justify an invasion there, or to drop into Afghanistan to justify an invasion there, or wherever they're going to invade next. Oh, there's ISIS down in Venezuela. We have to invade now. So, yeah, you've got to get those assets out there. But it again shows the duplicity of the United States government in all of this war conduct. Now, over in Iraq, their forces have taken the last major stronghold of the Islamic State, and so it looks like that is cranking on down as well. This U.S. policy is stumbling badly. Remember back in 2005, I think it was, General Wesley Clark blew the lid off the U.S. plans for war, and it was basically a plan to conquer all of the resource-rich areas of the Middle East, and now they've expanded to include South America, in order to lock those resources to the U.S. dollar, in order to keep foreign demand for dollars up and prop up that Federal Reserve note. But that policy is now failing. They're starting to lose these wars. They're still stuck in Afghanistan. They're failing in Syria. Let's call it what it is. They are failing in Syria. They're still locked in the quagmire of Yemen and Libya. And the American people are sick and tired of war at this point. Now, Iran is very alarmed by the sudden escalation of rhetoric coming from Nikki Haley, coming from Benjamin Netanyahu, and especially this focus on getting rid of the nuclear deal in order to put the war on Iran back on track. And remember, when Wesley Clark did come out with that list of countries that were going to be invaded, Iran was the last one on the list to be invaded in 2008. Obviously, a little off the timeline here. But Iran is already out there saying that they have already put together pre-planned measures of what they're going to do if the other side violates the P5+1 nuclear deal. Because Iran is fully in compliance, the IAEA has certified it. The entire argument being put forward by Nikki Haley is that Iran's work on missiles, which was never formally a part of the P5+1 deal, violates the spirit of the agreement. That Iran should have just known that along with surrendering all their nuclear weapons research, that they should stop making missiles to deter an invasion. I think the world is really getting fed up with the antics of the United States government here. Apparently, there's been another U.S. raid that killed civilians instead of militants, this one down in Somalia. Frankly, I'd forgotten that the U.S. was mucking about down in Somalia, but apparently they're doing about as bang-up job down there as they are in Syria. They keep missing the militants and hitting the civilians. So, getting on back to this desire to get into Venezuela, Trump has imposed more sanctions on Venezuela, calling Maduro a dictator and his presidency illegitimate. Now, both descriptions are laughable. Maduro was elected in free and fair elections. International observers said the elections were honest. Funny how international observers were not allowed to watch our elections last year. Former President Jimmy Carter said the election system in Venezuela is one of the best in the world. And the White House is out there saying there are going to be further economic measures. We're going to crush them down. They're going to collapse until they accept our help, meaning our puppet ruler. Well, guess what? Somebody wasn't thinking this one all the way through. What happens when the United States goes in and sanctions a country, says, we're not going to do business with you anymore? That country says, fine, you don't have anything we want anyway, and they go do business with other countries. And so what is happening now that the U.S. is throwing all these sanctions on Venezuela? Venezuela has turned around and they're striking these major oil deals with Russia and China. So it's all escaping their control. Every one of these foreign policy moves is a blunder because it produces a result that was not what they wanted. If we do this, they'll do that. All right, we do this. They did something different. How can they do that? They're not allowed to do that. Now, Maduro is inviting representatives of governments from around the world to a solidarity summit with Venezuela. And this is going to be held September 16th and 17th. And basically, they're inviting all these other countries to come on in and say, see, this is how the United States projects its power onto other countries, and we all have to stand united against it. And Maduro continues to say, Venezuela will not yield to the interests of Washington. Now, a little bit of good news from over in the China-India border. Apparently, India decided it wasn't worth going to war over this little stretch of road, and they're pulling back from the disputed border, so that is settling down. And apparently India's just decided it's going to be easier to just go another direction for their proposed road as well. But at least that has calmed down. A little bit of positive news in all these war zones. Now, here's an interesting story, and this is coming out of The Intercept. And it's saying that North Korea all along has been saying that it might give up its nuclear weapons. But the American corporate media won't tell you that. They're trying to portray North Korea as this intractable threat. And what North Korea is saying is that they might be willing to give up their nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons research on the condition that the United States would end its own threatening posture, which is a very reasonable position to make. Because North Korea doesn't have a lot of wealth. They don't have a lot of money. They don't really have the money to put into developing nuclear weapons. Those are expensive little things to build. Unless you buy one wholesale from Israel, but that's another story entirely. I'm sure that North Korea would much rather spend their money on things like civilian infrastructure, education. But they're looking at the United States government just hopping all over the world, gobbling up country after country after country. And now the U.S. has been talking tough about North Korea and running all these military drills off their coast. And it's a very unstable situation. And North Korea, like every other country, has a right to deter invasion. And that's what nuclear weapons are really for, to deter an invasion. Remember, in all of human history, only one nation has ever actually used nuclear weapons of mass destruction against the civilians of another country, and that is the United States of America. Over at Global Research in Canada, they have what they call the existential question of whom to trust and the looming threat of World War III. And it's basically pointing on out that at this stage of the run-up to the New World War, the public is starting to understand that they can't trust the so-called objective experts to tell them what's really going on. And instead, driven by career ambition, journalists, or let's be more accurate, prostitutes, correspondents, intelligence analysts, and international monitors cannot be relied on to present an accurate picture. They're all co-opted to sell the agenda. 100 years of unending war to enslave the planet. Now, getting into the domestic politics and Antifa, there is a concerted campaign to discourage conservative rallies. And some of it gets really nasty. You have people calling conservatives the Third Reich. And so there were going to be these conservative rallies to be held in San Francisco and Berkeley that were canceled from pressure from elected officials. Meanwhile, Antifa is running rampant all over San Francisco and Berkeley, and they're being cheered on by the media. Oh, yes, it's wonderful what they're doing there. So let's give you one example of what's going on. Over in Berkeley, okay, you've got these 100 black-clad Antifa carrying these signs that say no hate, and they crash a Patriot prayer group. And they get into fights with the cops. In this case, there is no question who initiated the violence at all. It's out there. And the Antifa mobs are attacking peaceful demonstrators at Berkeley. The police, once again, are standing down. Now, there's a little bit of good news because all of a sudden we're starting to see indications that Antifa and Black Lives Matter are having a bit of a leadership crisis, as in each of them thinks they should be calling the shots for the revolution. And there is now a split, and in some cases we're now starting to see Antifa and Black Lives Matter fighting each other, which I think is an improvement over them simply attacking and bashing totally random people. Now, up until recently, the corporate media has been very positive on Antifa. That may be about to change. In fact, it already is, and I'll tell you the catalyst for all of that when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And as I was saying before, up until recently, the corporate media has been treating Antifa like, you know, they're the good guys. And, oh, yes, they're fighting for freedom and they're fighting against fascism. And they're, you know, and yes, they're clubbing people, but they're only clubbing the bad people and the rest of it. However, that may be about to change because apparently there was a Bay Area TV anchor who went over to look at what was going on in Berkeley, and he got attacked, and his camera was smashed. And this is KTVU anchor Frank Somersville, and he basically went public about what happened, despite warnings that his career was at risk if he said anything negative about Antifa. But he basically said he went on over there and there were all these people dressed all in black. Remember Hitler's brown shirts? That same thing, except the brown shirts didn't cover their faces. And these guys are out there chanting, no hate, no hate, no hate, but they've got shields and gloves and gas masks, and they're just attacking this Patriot prayer group. And so this professional news journalist started taking pictures, and Antifa went after him and said, don't take pictures of us, don't take pictures of us, and they took his camera. And he went public, and it may have sparked a catalyst because MSNBC just started reporting on Antifa violence. And apparently on Morning Joe, mentally stunted snowflakes on college campuses. I think this whole Antifa, Black Lives Matter attempt to kick up race riots is in the middle of self-destructing. Because again, you cannot bring about real social change by alienating popular opinion. It just is not going to work here. Now, meanwhile, over at the Washington Post, they're out there insisting that all of these conservatives, these right-wing radicals who are, you know, putting their faces in the way of the Antifa fists, you know, they're all inspired by Russia. And yes, they're neo-Nazis, but no, they're not emulating Nazi Germany. They're being inspired by Putin's Russia. And then they wonder why nobody wants to read their newspaper anymore. Last week, the New Yorker magazine actually wrote an article trying to insist that there is no deep state in America. It just looks like there is, but there really isn't. Which is sort of the New Yorker's version of pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Weird. All right. Coming up here on top of the hour, Trump is just now coming on out and saying he stands by his pardon of Sheriff Joe Arpaio. The liberals are out there screaming that pardoning Joe Arpaio is basically giving a green light to racists. It's a bit of a stretch. That's where they're coming from. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And this is hour number 2. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We are hearing from inside the White House that President Trump is becoming very frustrated with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. And last month, there were rumors that he was going to resign, and now the rumors are shifting over toward he's actually being asked to resign. And basically, Trump is out there saying that Rex is just totally establishment in his thinking. He won't break loose from that, even though that's the direction Trump is trying to go. So it's another indicator that the problem isn't Donald Trump. The problem is that he hired all these establishment people into his White House staff, and they're perpetuating the establishment. All right, let's take a phone call. Jim in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Question. Since people are really acting stupid and crazy, not only in Berkeley, but other parts of the country, what's going to happen when the economy crashes? How in the hell are they going to be acting then?
Probably pretty much the same, but you need to remember something about those Antifa, Black Lives Matter people out in Berkeley and San Francisco. The ringleaders, at least, are being paid to be there and stir up trouble. So I don't think it's really a represent. In fact, it is not really fair to say that these represent the groups that they claim to represent. And I think one of the reasons why they're failing to gain any traction is ordinary black people don't want to be associated with Black Lives Matter because Black Lives Matter is making them look bad. Same thing with the Antifa people.
Well, that's very true. My last point, your first story this afternoon regarding what happened in Texas with the airboat and the guy was rescuing this black family, and he's getting criticized because he had a Confederate flag. Is that a legitimate story?
That actually happened. Somebody put up the photo, and the liberal whiner snowflake people got on board and said, "Oh, how horrible! He's got a Confederate flag on his airboat." Can we focus on the fact that he's pulling these people out of the floodwaters so that they do not drown?
Well, again, where's our humanity these days?
A lot of people are asking that right now. Hurricane Harvey has become a Rorschach test for a lot of America. And a lot of what is coming on out there that we're seeing on Twitter and the social media, it's certainly not presenting a very positive image of the American culture to the rest of the world.
Well, I would agree with that because, they used to look up to America, and now I'm embarrassed almost to be an American.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this Hillary supporter who came out with this tweet about, yes, I would accept a ride in the boat, but then I'd tear the flag off before I left. It makes us all look so petty, and again, it gives the impression that there is a large segment of the population for whom politics is the number one priority and agenda in their entire life. Okay, and
right.
If Hillary versus Trump is the most important thing in your life, boy, have you got a really thin and shallow life. That's all I can say.
Right. Well, Michael, I'm going to let you go. You take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Thank you for the phone call here. Now then, let's get into the Awan brothers here. Jason Chaffetz, who's the former chairman of the House Oversight Committee, is out there saying that he knows the federal government were watching the Awan brothers for a very long time before they were arrested. They were watching what they were doing, what information they were stealing, where it was going. And Chaffetz is out there saying this is a much more serious situation than most people understand. And apparently the federal government just let the Awan brothers alone to see what they were doing and who they were communicating with. But one thing that's very clear is it wasn't a lone operator, wasn't just the brothers. It's part of something much, much larger. And they're trying to follow the trail electronically to see where the information was going, where the money was flowing. And there's a big question to be asked out there. Now, as you know, over the weekend, it came on out that the federal government is now talking espionage charges against Imran Awan. And they're putting pressure on him to make a deal, to turn state's evidence primarily against Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who then in turn will be pressured to turn state's evidence against Hillary Clinton. And that might be the link, because again, that email server, charitable foundation, it is a legitimate question to ask, especially with the history of Chinagate. If Hillary Clinton, while serving as Secretary of State, was selling U.S. secrets to foreign interests, using her private email server to deliver the goods and her so-called charitable foundation to collect and launder the money. It is a question that needs to be asked. It is a question that deserves an answer. And how it ties in with this is, what if the Aiea brothers were part of Hillary's spy network? And I think that may be what Jason is hinting at, because he's saying this goes a lot farther than the Aiea brothers. And I just hope that the Aiea, and for that matter Debbie Wasserman Schultz, don't become depressed, don't fly in small aircraft, don't take walks late at night in suburban Washington, D.C. parks. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Now, speaking of Hillary Clinton, apparently the ACLU is suing the state of California because apparently on the day of the general election, 45,000 ballots were simply thrown away. Now, these were vote-by-mail ballots, and the ACLU is saying that California justified throwing these ballots out, most of which were for Donald Trump, because visual inspection showed that the handwriting, they weren't 100% certain it matched the signature on file for the voter registration. In other words, it was totally subjective. 45,000, that's a lot of votes, even in a state the size of California. Now, 60% of the votes in 2016 during the general election were sent in by mail. Over half of California's voters have set their status to vote by mail for life. That means that across the board there is room for massive voter fraud if over half of all ballots can simply be tossed in the trash. And the ACLU is absolutely right on target with this. Our election system is a complete joke. Now, Colorado finally capitulated and said they're going to turn over their data to Trump's Voter Integrity Commission. And as soon as they announced that, they started seeing hundreds of people wanting to withdraw their voter registration. Hundreds. All across the state. Let's see. Arapahoe County, 160 people pulled their registrations. See, other counties, same thing. People don't want to get caught with the fact that they had fraudulent voter registrations. They've asked to withdraw them. All right, let's take a phone call. Kathleen in Paris, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, Michael. I'm going to talk about the M1 brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about... I'm not sure I'm buying this. That, oh, yeah, we're on to M1 Brothers for a long time. But anyway, another thing that
let me respond to that first, because it's one thing when you catch a guy holding up a convenience store and he's on the cameras, security cameras, and you've got an open and shut case. We're dealing with people who are in the very peak of the government and presumably have political patronage to be doing what they're doing. And so I think if I were a federal investigator and I'm looking at these people who are being paid by Debbie Wasserman Schultz and others, and I think they're doing something nefarious, I would want to build a rock-solid, ironclad case before I dared go to court, because otherwise there's going to be interference and attempts to, just get it blocked. The other issue is when you're dealing with an espionage case, if you just go out and arrest the spy, that's it. The network collapses and you don't know where it goes. As opposed to spying on the spy and learning who they're working for and working your way up the food chain, as it were, to get to the mastermind.
Well, I guess catching them at the airport just before taking off, that could indicate that you're right there, that they were watching him.
Yes.
He was getting on a plane, you know. The other thing I was going to talk about is that how heavy they are or were into car dealerships, and that it seems that getting drugs into the country, or that was one of the methods for getting drugs in, is that, you know, when a car dealership is shipping cars into the country, they're not routinely met with sniffer dogs. That it's something that it's just a possibility. I heard that, and so I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, one thing is very obvious. Looking at the Aiea brothers, they had an immense amount of wealth for people who ostensibly were IT contractors. And again, the fact that Debbie Wasserman Schultz kept Imran on her payroll up until his arrest indicates that maybe he had something on her, or that she was his patron and trying to protect him and get him out of the country before things could fall apart. But I can imagine right now Debbie Wasserman Schultz is feeling very, very nervous.
Yeah. Well, I was going to give another little bit of credit to George Webb, because he was screaming, look at the Enman brothers for months before anybody in the news talked about it. Thank you, Michael. All
right, thanks an awful lot, Kathleen. We're going to let you go. And yeah, it's becoming more and more obvious that these important stories are breaking first in the independent media. And only when it becomes a major sensation on the internet does the corporate media finally say, look, we have to report this. Everybody already knows it anyway, and we can't look like we're trying to cover up for this thing, even though we know that's what they're doing here. Now, the PC crowd is still out there talking about banning this and banning that. And apparently there is this theater in Memphis that has had a tradition over the decades of an annual screening of Gone with the Wind. And apparently they have now been pressured to cancel that because apparently Gone with the Wind is now a triggering movie and it's insensitive to show that. Now, I'm old enough to remember Disney's Song of the South, which was denounced as racist and stereotype-ridden decades ago and pulled from circulation, pulled from release. Amazingly enough, there is a movement now to bring it back because people are looking at it and realizing that it was a very romanticized image of the South, and it isn't really insulting in any way. And amazingly enough, even Whoopi Goldberg is on board with that, saying, yeah, we should get that back. A lot of great songs in it, a lot of great animation, and it actually represented an enormous opportunity for black actors and actresses at a time when they didn't get a lot of work. And what's really ironic is all these people who screamed about shutting down Song of the South meant that all those people who were acting in it, singing in it, no longer got their residuals. Just cut them off. They don't think these things all the way through. Now, ever hear of the banned in Boston effect? If somebody bans something, that actually gets people more interested in finding out what's going on or just getting one. So down in Alabama, there's a company, Alabama Flag and Banner. It's one of the last remaining flag makers that makes Confederate flags, and right now they're saying they cannot keep up with the orders. It seems all this stuff about banning the Confederate flag, everybody wants to buy one now. It's like when the government started getting too big for its britches, we were all out there buying Gadsden flags. Well, people are now buying Confederate flags. They can't keep up with them. Good. That's the grassroots coming back and saying we're sick and tired of all this nonsense here. By the way, for all those people coming on in and saying, well, we should tear down this statue, Robert E. Lee was an enemy of the state, he was this, he was that. Gerald R. Ford issued a full pardon, posthumously, obviously, for Robert E. Lee, restoring full rights of U.S. citizenship. Just a little something to keep in mind here. Now, last week we reported on the very disappointing news that the judge in the class action lawsuit against Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the DNC threw the case out. Now, this was the case where people who had donated to the Democratic Party to support Bernie Sanders felt they had been cheated, that the DNC had misrepresented what they were going to do with the money, and they were donating to support Hillary Clinton and instead Bernie Sanders, and instead the DNC diverted the money to Hillary Clinton and openly kicked Sanders out of the running. And what's really interesting is Federal Judge William Zlock, although he dismissed the lawsuit, admitted, yes, it's very obvious. The DNC and Debbie Wasserman Schultz rigged the primaries against Sanders. His justification for dismissing the lawsuit, well, it's not really against the law for the DNC to do that. And again, that's absurd. If the Central Committee is going to pick out who the candidate's going to be, why do you even have a primary? The whole thing is a charade. So, a lot of people are very concerned. Apparently, Donald Trump is expected to lift the ban on surplus military gear being given to local police forces. We're talking about weapons and equipment suited to a battlefield, a war zone, now, once again, pouring onto the streets of America. And apparently, Attorney General Jeff Sessions is wholly on board with this. I think we're skirting at the edge of violating posse comitatus. Because if you have a uniformed force in the streets of America with military weapons, that's a military force. It's an army. Okay, so let's talk about the economic news, because that's not doing very well. Sears revenues are predicted to hit zero in 3 years, but of course between now and then there will have to be a bankruptcy. Sears is going down the tubes at an ever faster rate. I'm amazed that they're still finding anybody willing to loan them any money at all. Story at Investment Watch blog, you're simply not allowed to know what happens in the real U.S. economy. America's auto bubble is on the verge of implosion. And we all know what's going on there. They're trying to keep the factories open, trying to keep the workers working. They're building up a huge surplus of unsold cars. And I mentioned before how there's this old drive-in movie theater lot. The movie theater's been gone. They took the screens down and everything. It used to be used for a flea market. Now it is an overflow lot for all the car dealerships who are trying to get rid of their 2017s because the 2018 models are due to hit the showroom floor at any time now. And over this last weekend, we heard one of the most bizarre used car commercials we've ever heard. And it was this used car company, the guy who owns the thing, out there saying, we have to get rid of cars. We just lost the lease on our storage lot. And he said, and they're out there with amazing values. Anybody who has any money at all, it's a great time to be getting a car. Then in this same commercial, he says, if you have a lot to lease or rent, please call us because we have to get our cars off our current lot by the end of the month. And that tells you just how desperate things are right there. I mean, if you look at the prices, look at the deals on the commercials. If we actually had money, we'd all be going to get new cars. Goodness knows, Claire and I could use a newer car. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And speaking of cars, I'm going to throw this in here just because it's going to annoy some certain individuals who keep calling into the show here. Somebody actually set up a drag race between the Tesla Model X, which goes for $145,000, and a Lamborghini Aventador, which goes for $500,000. The Tesla won. You just think about that one for a while. Those electric cars are the coming thing. The only problem is, right now, the electricity for the electric cars is still being generated primarily from fossil fuels. You get around that, And these things are really, really going to be there. And I've had a chance to see a Tesla up close, and I thought it looked really good as well. Remember George from Texas? He just started sending me some pictures, and I'll put them up at the website after the radio show today so you can take a look. And it's a mess over there. Meanwhile, we'll take a phone call. Michael in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how you doing? I just want to call. I don't know if you heard or if you discussed it already, but Stormfront, the white nationalist, horrible neo-Nazi site, whatever, is down, and it's allegedly taken down because Google and Cloudflare and the web, which is the domain host provider, basically said that they're not going to tolerate hate speech anymore. And my commentary is like, we're down a slippery slope, my friend. I mean, they are claiming that Stormfront has like aggravated or like accelerated black on white violence, and they're advocating for it. And there's people that have been like murdered because of Stormfront. It's like, what's next? You're gonna ban cars because of Charlottesville? You're gonna ban guns, knives? It's never gonna end, and it's all just a conditioning effect. And I don't really care what they talk about. I think they have a right to say whatever they want as long as they're not hurting anybody. And at this rate, man, oh man, I don't know what's going to happen. I just wanted your take on that, but have a good one, brother.
All right, thanks an awful lot. I'm in agreement with you. Now, obviously, I don't visit Stormfront. I don't link to them. I've only looked at them a couple of times, and that was like years and years ago. But yes, if you have a First Amendment right to freedom of speech, that applies to everybody. The instant you start being selective, you no longer have freedom of speech, you have permitted speech, and that is indeed a slippery slope. That being said, the few times that I did look at Stormfront, I thought it was a propaganda outfit to sell the idea that there was racism in the United States, not to cause it. So who knows on that one. But we are seeing, unfortunately, basically the ultimate goal is to shut down any websites that challenge the official view on anything. Whatever the agenda, whatever the policy is, if you're not in accord, you will be silenced. That seems to be the direction they're going towards right now. Getting on back to the economic news, somebody actually wrote in a comment about the movie Gone with the Wind, and they visited a museum in Cleburne, Texas, which is named after a Confederate general, and one display quoted Hattie McDaniel, who played Mammy, saying that it's definitely better to get paid $700 a day for playing a maid than just $7 a day to actually be one. So that ought to put things in perspective. These movies were wonderful opportunities for these black actors and actresses. And when you try and shut them down, you're actually harming the people you claim to be speaking for. Just a little something you might want to keep in mind here. Apparently, they're talking about a $100 billion bailout for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, possibly as soon as October. So again, despite the soaring stock market, and they are definitely out there saying, ooh, look at the Dow, it's never been higher, things are wonderful. No, they are not. They are not. And we're literally in a race to see where the U.S. government needs to start a major global war ahead of the economic collapse so they got something to blame it on. Because if the economy comes down and they don't have somebody to scapegoat for it, we, the American people, are going to point that finger of blame at Wall Street and Washington, D.C. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we take this next phone call, somebody sent me in an email about the tearing down of the Confederate statues. And especially with an eye toward all these governments down in the southern parts of the country that are tearing these statues down, they're not really thinking it all the way through. And I want to share a little experience with you. Many years ago, I earned my living as a professional magician. And one summer, I got hired to work on a real Mississippi riverboat, the Mississippi Queen. And I would play a riverboat gambler, and I did card tricks based on gambling. I dressed up like a gambler. We had Necco wafers for the poker chips and everything like that. And a big part of these riverboat tours we're taking people to all of these Civil War sites and various monuments and some of the surviving antebellum plantations. And it occurs to this person who's writing this email and to me that these local governments who are now tearing down these monuments and these statues are actually destroying their future tourism and the revenue it generates. You're not going to see people get off the bus, walk into the town square, and have some tour guide say, and over here on this blank piece of dirt, there used to be a statue to Stonewall Jackson. So, again, knee-jerk reactions to liberalism, and they don't think it all the way through. All right, let's take a phone call. Patrick in Oregon, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, good afternoon, Michael. Glad to talk to you. Yeah, you briefly brought up about how Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were having trouble, and they're going to need a bailout. Well, the Obamacare's in trouble, or Freddie, they're in trouble because Obamacare they've been doing a net asset sweep for a couple of years now, taking all their money away from them to put into Obamacare.
Yes.
And so that's basically why I called, and I'd like to know what we can do about that.
Well, again, at this point, the system is irretrievably doomed. They're robbing Peter to pay Paul. They were looting Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to prop up Obamacare. Obamacare is a failure. They've been plundering the Social Security Trust Fund to prop up the federal government as a whole. And now they can't make good on all of that borrowing. There's too much debt. And even worse, we have a government that has encouraged corporations to offshore the high-paying jobs, which means the tax revenues coming on in are in decline. We keep hearing the federal government saying that the tax revenues are at an all-time high. I don't know who they're taxing. It's certainly not all these people who are being forced to take these minimum wage jobs.
Nope. Sooner or later, all of us people are going to have to get together, and we're going to have to get our courages up, and we need to round up all these politicians that are doing this to us, and we need to tar and feather them and run them out of town in a rail, or better yet, find a tall oak tree and hang them all from it.
Well, it sounds romantic, but in the real world, I have to say, don't do that. Because if you start a riot or a revolution, the one thing this government is really, really good at is killing people, and let's not give them the excuse. At this point, it should be obvious that the best course of action for the American people is to sit back and do nothing, de-link from the system as much as possible, pay off your debt as much as possible, and just stop listening and stop obeying, and the whole thing is going to come crashing down the way the former Soviet Union did. Then it will be up to then.
When it does come, I won't argue with that point. But when it does come crashing down, we can't forgive these people of their crimes, and we need to make an example of them. And I hope when it does come crashing down, we need to do what I said a moment ago. Is to take these people and hang them high from an oak tree.
Oh, well, if that's what's going to make you feel...
As an example, so nobody will ever do it again.
I see your point of view there. I think, though, many of us are going to be busy trying to build a whole new government as quickly as possible so that some carpetbagger doesn't come on in and try and restart the old system all over again.
You're right, sir. And if we make a good example of these people that we run out of office when that happens, we need to, like I said, hang them from a high oak tree, so that this new crowd that comes through will not try it again.
Well, there's always going to be somebody who's willing to try it again. I mean, look at how some leaders in the past wound up, like Charles I or Ceausescu or Mussolini. And still, there are always these power-mad money junkies. They'll figure, it's not going to happen to me. I'm better than those former tyrants. Patrick, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Lynn in Washington. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Michael. I was just thinking of all these cars that are on all these lots, and I've been watching wall-to-wall cars underwater that are never going to work again in Texas. I think all these dealers should just send their cars down there. When the flood's over, they won't have any problems getting rid of them.
I think you're absolutely right. Certainly the car dealerships just outside the inundation zones are going to be doing really, really well. But in the end, I'm almost wondering if what this nation needs right now is a replay of Ronald Reagan's cheese program, where there was this huge surplus of cheese that had built up, and what they did is the government simply acquired it all and sent these giant blocks of cheese. Every American family got one. I remember when we got one, it was just this huge block of cheese. It was good cheese, too. So if we really have that many cars that are not being used, maybe it's time, because there are a lot of very old cars on the road. Mine's one of them. Let's just get everybody a new, reliable car that allows them to drive further to find work, or to drive at all to find work. A lot of people don't even have cars anymore, and get people back on those roads out there trying to rebuild this economy. Of course, money junkies don't like to give things away for free, and therein lies the problem, because their attitude seems to be that all the money should flow from us to them, and they're not really mentally capable of understanding that we have run out of money, that we can, no matter how attractive the prices are, we can't buy those cars, and we are not going to take out any more loans because we don't have any confidence in the future of being able to pay those loans off. That's the one thing that I most love about my 18-year-old Honda. It's paid for. They can't come take it away from me.
Yes, I have a paid-for one, too, but as I'm watching all these people lose their cars, I'm thinking about all these people with the surplus, and I see a marriage in heaven. Anyway, I'll let you go, Mike. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much there. We're going to let you go. And yeah, there's an opportunity there. I mean, it's a shame that, somebody has to lose their home and their existing car in order to be motivated to go buy a newer car. And again, I don't know what the situation is for many of these people in Houston regarding flood insurance, because it is a known inundation zone. And sure, you can get flood insurance very inexpensively in some parts of the country. We can get flood insurance right here where we live on this part of the island, probably for pennies a month. We're never going to get flooded because we're on the top of a ridgeline. But in Houston, I don't know what flood insurance goes for, but I can imagine it's very expensive, and I can also imagine a disaster on this scale. Those insurance companies aren't going to be able to cover it all. We're going to see these insurance companies that handle flood insurance are going to go out of business. It's a mess. It really is. Now then, getting on back to the economic news. BlackRock is now advising investors to get into gold on the basis of U.S. political instability. Even they are seeing the cracks start to form in the facade of the U.S. federal government. They're seeing the potential for it to come apart. And the make-believe pretend economy with it, by which I mean these pieces of colored ink and paper that we are taught to think actually means something. And, okay. Apparently, I'm just now getting word on this. North Korea has just fired a test missile over Japan. And here I was thinking things were calming down. All right. Now, something to keep in mind. If you look at a map at that part of the world, for North Korea to test a long-range missile, it's going to have to go over someplace, whether it's Japan or Guam or wherever. It doesn't really have an open access to a stretch of ocean with nothing in it, the way the United States does at the Kennedy Space Launch Facility, and we have all that Atlantic out there to the southeast. All right, let's take another phone call. Terry in Oregon, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, you said pay off your debts before the system comes down. A lot of people think, why should I give good money now when the money's going to be worthless later and I can pay off my debts then?
Well, the problem is, as the money starts to lose its value, they're just going to crank up the interest payments. so that however much, they're going to get their pound of flesh from you. There's no question about it. The big issue is when the economy starts to fall apart and you can't make the payments anyway, that's when they're going to come and they're going to take your car and your house and everything of any real value that you own. That will be that'll be the last phase before it comes apart. Anybody who's got an outstanding car loan or mortgage, they're going to lose their home or their car.
Well, the problem is they're not going to have anybody to sell it to because everybody's going to be in the same boat, and they're not going to want to kick out 50% of the people.
They don't think like that, especially in terms of the homes. They'll just sit on the properties and wait for the economy to restart, and then they'll have all the homes to resell to the next generation.
Yeah, my dad told me something about during the Depression they put some kind of freeze on foreclosures. I don't know if that's true or not. Do you know anything about it?
It's entirely possible. I remember when Nixon put a wage and salary and price freeze to try and deal with the aftermath of the Nixon shock.
Yeah, well, I guess, a lot depends on how your mortgage is written, if they can really jack up the interest,
Well, if you have a variable rate mortgage, and a lot of people really do, then yeah, you're going to be in trouble because as the prime rate goes up, everything tied to that will go up as well. And that's not just your variable rate mortgage. It's going to be your credit card rates. And that's why getting those credit cards paid off is probably as important as anything else.
Yeah, some people think, hey, I'm going to put my money in Bitcoin and gold now, and then when they go up, I'll just cash out and pay all the stuff off. But, that's a risk you're taking.
Yeah, that's a pipe dream because when we get to that stage, nobody's going to have any extra cash lying around because you're going to see food prices going up, fuel prices going on up, price of toilet paper is going to go up. The mechanism is set up. As it starts to come apart, they will suck every piece of wealth and real assets out of the general population. That's the way it's always happened in the past.
Question that me and a lot of other people have. I get everything from the government. I'm living off a Social Security check. I'm living off of a VA disability from Vietnam. Those are the two main things. And what happens when, the money goes to worthless and all the prices go up and, the money's no good, they're going to just quit paying us. That's the insecurity about this whole thing.
That is the insecurity because you may still get that check, but it's going to be relatively worthless. And this is why I keep saying that we need to start developing a sense of community, where we're going to have to be supporting each other and taking care of each other. Family members are going to have to be looking after people and not wait for the government to come on in because at some point that government spigot is going to shut off. And if you go back and you look at every government that's failed in the past, like when Batista's came down, everybody who was dependent on that government got absolutely hammered.
Yeah, I guess we won't know all the details until it happens.
Yeah, it's going to be hard for pretty much everybody, except for the money junkies, and that's why we need to be ready and really be thinking about a restart as quickly as possible. That's going to look after the most delicate, most vulnerable segments of our society, which includes our veterans, who are already getting a raw deal, in my opinion. And
well. See, the problem with that is, Mike, the people, the deep state people and the bankers and all that, they got a detailed plan, how they're going to come in and take it before we even get a chance. They know what they're doing. And, for us to get together and try to figure something out, I think we're way outclassed by them. And they're just going to, put in something new that gives them favoritism just like it did before.
Well, they're already starting to do that. I mean, there was that change to the law that redefines bank savings account holders as unsecured investors in the bank. So if the bank loses money, they can dip into your savings account. And they can go into your safety deposit box in the event of an economic emergency. They're already changing the laws to take care of themselves when it comes apart. Now, when I said people need to get together, I didn't mean that in the context of trying to figure out how to go after the bankers. I'm saying we need to forget about this whole idea of being subservient to a government, and we need to start forming community groups where we know each other by sight, we know each other, what everybody's doing, what our strengths and weaknesses are, so that when the grid abandons us, we're going to be able to take care of ourselves as a small little community. With these people doing the food and these other people doing the car repair and these other people doing this and that, and all of us committed to taking care of the vulnerable in our midst, the children, the elderly, the veterans, and so forth and so on.
That's why we all should have something to give. We can't just, if we just take care of ourselves now, we should have a little more to be able to participate in that, to give so we can get.
Well, you find out what your strengths are, because there's going to be a lot of barter. There's going to be a lot of needing to fixing things. People who are good plumbers or carpenters or tinkers are going to be much in demand.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mike, I appreciate your thoughts on that. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Yeah, this is not going to be a picnic. Let's not kid ourselves. But right now, the bankers are still trying to find a way to get us all back to that perpetual debt cycle. I mean, I go out to the mail every day. I'm getting all these offers for credit cards. I don't want a credit card. I don't want more loans. I have no confidence that this economy will support my borrowing any more money and my ability to pay it back. It's just not there. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go right to the phones. Paul in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Michael, what's on my mind is about the removal of the statues.
Yes.
And the thought came to my mind where, the same people who decry the crimes of the past ignore the criminals in the present. And, they want to take down the statues of the Lees and the Jacksons throughout the South, as they claim the moral high ground fighting against the crimes of the past. Yet here, Hillary Clinton walks around a free woman. George Bush, what he did to Iraq, he's a free man. And so what is so sad is, despite Antifa being, heavily Marxist and in it for the violence, I think there's an element among them that might actually be for arresting and jailing fascists and war criminals. And I do believe that's something even, the people on the right marching with their Confederate flags would agree upon. And that's what's tragic about this. And I'll have to make a list about this. There is common ground between the, the pro-Lee marchers and the Antifa protesters. A lot of the people who were voting for leaving the Lee statue up, they're not for fascism. They're not for a big government. They're not for, a lot of these people are not for imperial meddling and hegemony throughout the world and lording over the rest of the world with American military might. So in a sense, it's sad that they're so, eager for a fight and have misguided youthful passions, that they embark in this path of futility and just needless, reckless violence, when if we could only unite these groups on these issues and focus on arresting the war criminals in our midst. And they still haven't been tried. 9/11 still has not been
okay, Paul, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we're almost at the top of the hour here. What you need to understand, first of all, again, Antifa's leadership are being paid to go out and cause trouble and to keep everybody focused on these Civil War Confederate flag issues as a distraction, to keep us from thinking about what Hillary Clinton did, what George Bush did, what the CIA has been and is still doing. And that's why they're trying to get us looking at the past and talking about all that stuff, because otherwise America was starting to come together and say, look, after all this nonsense about Trump and Russia, and we have Hillary Clinton clearly colluding with Russia over the Uranium One deal, why are we not seeing prosecutions? And so all of a sudden they're fanning up racial tension, race riots, Antifa, violence. Oh, we've got to get rid of the Confederacy. It's all a big distraction. The Antifa is working for the Clintons, Bushes, and the CIA ultimately, and behind that, the New World Order.
Well, I'm well aware of that. I'm just in that aspect of it, that they are working for Soros and that gang. But they need to be brought, taught this. That's what's tragic about it.
Well, again, when you've got a paycheck coming on in to be a jerk, you're going to continue to be a jerk. Paul, thank you for the phone call. We got to let you go and do a station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And just let me tamp that down a little bit. Okay, so we're talking about the economic news. And by the way, this is hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, Vietnam just put 50 of their bankers on trial for graft and mismanagement. Following along in the patterns of Iceland, which threw their crooked bankers in jail. Places like Iran, which will actually execute criminal bankers, fraudulent bankers. Why are we not seeing that here in the United States? Why here in the United States do we have a system where every time a banker commits a major fraud, the American people are forced to cough up the money to cover the losses? That's not a system that is going to discourage or deter future fraud. If anything, it's going to encourage it. Yeah, let's run a scam. If it blows up, they'll just make the American people pay for it all here. Now, in June of last year, President Putin banned Jacob Rothschild and his New World Order banking cartel family from entering Russian territory under any circumstances whatsoever. And now, just over 1 year later, Putin has declared Russia is totally independent from the Rothschild New World Order banking cartel, which is why Russia has gone from being a friend and partner to the top of the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list. Because any time a country tries to break free from this scam of private central banking, the other nations still enslaved to private central banks will attack them. That's what happened leading up to World War II. At the end of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles imposed a private central bank on Germany. When the Nazis came to power, they shut that bank down. And they set up a new state bank and a value-based currency. And Germany's economy lit up like a Christmas tree. It was called the German Miracle. Actually got Hitler's face on the cover of Time magazine as their Man of the Year for the amazing economic miracle he'd pulled off. And everybody's saying, how did they do it? We need that here. And there was the crux of the problem. Because nations that are enslaved to private central banks cannot compete with nations with a free, honest economy. And that's when the machinations began to start a new war to destroy Germany. Same thing down in Libya. Libya threw out their private central bank. They started a state central bank and a value-based currency, the gold dinar. Then all of a sudden, oh my goodness, Gaddafi's this, Gaddafi's that. Color revolution, go on down, kill him. Shut down the state bank, impose a new private central bank on the people of Libya. The goal for the gold dinar, nobody knows where that went. Private central banking is not about banking, it's about enslaving the human race. Because the very best slaves that one can find are people who do not realize they're slaves, who do not see their slave chains for what they are. And your slave chain is the interest that is being charged on the currency you use to conduct your business with. Meanwhile, China has invited 5 more nations to join the BRICS system. Guinea, Mexico, Thailand, and Tajikistan. And the 5th state is Egypt. And they've all been invited to come together and start looking at joining the BRICS and pivoting away from the doomed U.S. dollar-centric Western banking system. Now, this is an article which I think really illustrates the whole point that we do not have a working economy right now. This is over in the Miami Herald, and it's basically a character study, if you will, of a lady named Betsy Winkler, and it talks about how she will go around to like the bakery store and stock up on the expired, the breads and pastries that are past their sell-by date. They're getting stale, they're getting hard. And then she goes on over to all these other things and the food bank, and she hits the grocery store dumpster to get the fruits and vegetables that have been thrown on out. Why is she doing all of this? Because it's the only way she can afford the medical long-term care for her husband. And by the way, supermarkets have started to do something I think is a little bit scummy. And that is when the surplus food is thrown into the dumpsters, they'll pour a bottle of bleach all over it. So if you want to eat, you come into the store and you buy the food. I don't have money to buy the food. Well, that's not our problem. Another indication, the American people have lost their sense of humanity. Now, apparently, with precautions around Calais proving to be more effective, thousands of migrants are now trying to reach Great Britain from the Spanish port of Bilbao. And apparently, police have stopped 1,700 stowaways at the port this year, 5 times more than last year. And of course, for everyone they stop, who knows how many are actually getting through. It's not like it's a long trip. They just have to stay hidden for a little while, and they can get off on the other side. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, here's an interesting little story, and you probably saw a blurb about it here and there. Apparently, over in the town of Rimini, on the Adriatic coast of Italy, very, very beautiful place, there was a tourist attacked and raped, gang raped in front of her boyfriend. The boyfriend was beaten up and knocked unconscious, and the woman was raped repeatedly by these 4 men. Now, interestingly enough, in all the reports I saw about this, there was no mention about the perpetrators or where they were from. Only in one newspaper, the Italian newspaper ANSA, was it pointed out the girls' attackers were dark-skinned and thought to be migrants. Now, Angela Merkel is out there campaigning for her re-election as Chancellor of Germany, and she's still out there supporting her open border policy, saying she would do it all over again. And if she's going to keep pushing that agenda on the German people who have just had migrants and the problems they bring up to here, then she'd better be investing in huge numbers of Diebold electronic voting machines and hiring Hillary's vote-rigging consultants, because that's the only way she's ever going to be chancellor again. She's getting booed off the stage. She can't even do a speech. She'll show up and everybody's just booing her and telling her to get lost. Don't we all miss the world where our leaders were supposed to represent we the people rather than some shadowy figure in the background with a lot of money and dreams of global greatness? Okay, now over at the Conservative Tribune, they've got a story where, not content to wait for Donald Trump's border wall, basically Yuma, Arizona built their own. They built a long wall along their side of the border with Mexico, and they've already noticed that illegal crossings dropped 94% through their part of the state. Obviously, they can go around the wall and go into some other parts of the state. But it does work. The wall does work. So does enforcing the law. And that really is what it comes on down to. If you enforce those Title VIII laws, you will solve the problem. These migrants, these illegal immigrants, these refugees are being incentivized to come here, because if they come here, they're going to get all kinds of free stuff. In fact, there was another article we saw earlier today accusing the food stamp system of a bias in that it's easier for illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants, to get food stamps than for many U.S. citizens. I'm sure those New World Order people go to bed at night dreaming that they're making a better planet. They're delusional, just like the Scientologists. You look at what the Scientologists are actually doing, And they justify it to themselves in this religious belief that no matter what horrible, terrible things they're doing now, in the long run, it's going to make a much better world for us all. It's like the people on Wall Street who will defraud their clients and cheat and lie and all the rest of it because they have this religious belief from Adam Smith that if everybody is greedy for themselves, somehow the system as a whole is improving and moving forward. It's the true believer mindset, and it's gotten this nation into trouble so many times before. Now, let's get on back to this whole situation at Bunkerville. Eric Parker and Scott Drexler are free and back home in Idaho, and the family's putting up pictures on their Facebook page. The jury found them not guilty on most charges last Tuesday and hung on others, 4 for Parker, 2 for Drexler. But apparently on those hung verdicts, 11 jurors wanted to vote not guilty. There was one single juror that kept holding out. Now, Ricky Loveline and Stephen Stewart were found not guilty on all 10 charges. They have been immediately released. Now, acting U.S. Attorney Stephen Meyer in Las Vegas is the lead prosecutor in the Bunkerville standoff case. And he has told U.S. District Judge Gloria Navarro he intends to retry Parker and Drexler for a third time on September 25th. What a hideous waste of taxpayer money. How about you go after some real criminals instead of being the hatchet man for what was basically an attempted land snatch? All right, we're going to go to the phones here. Tony in Puerto Rico, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hello, Mike. Yeah, I just read that North Korea fired a missile over Japan. What do you think? This means war or cooler heads are going to prevail?
Well, I hope cooler heads will prevail. North Korea is just trying to test that their missiles are going to work. Now, when they fired 3 of them at once a few days ago, apparently one of those exploded on launch. So they got problems to work out on those things. But these are test firings. They're not attacks on anybody. And it's not like North Korea is the only country test firing missiles. The United States test fires missiles all the time. On the next island over that way, they have the Pacific Missile Test Range. They're launching things from there all the time. But for North Korea, it's a big deal. Oh, they're being provocative. How dare they prepare to fight back when we want to take their country from them?
Well, if the United States needs an excuse, I think this is it.
It's not really an excuse. It doesn't make any sense to go on in and say that North Korea does not have a right to defend themselves against a threatening nation, which is what the United States has been. But you're right, they'll try and have the corporate media spin it that way, but I don't think they're getting any traction. I don't think anybody's really afraid of North Korea as much as they are of their own government.
Okay, Mike, thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. But, you know, the U.S. government is so desperate for a war, it's so desperate to push this war agenda forward, they'll grab anything that can happen. And I made a spoof of it earlier, but I'm waiting for somebody to come on out and say that Russia somehow caused Hurricane Harvey. Now, getting back over to the Dakota Access Pipeline case, the lawyer for the defendants is requesting a change of venue because there has been this intense public relations campaign in the community which inevitably has biased any potential juror against the defendants. And that is a justification for a change of venue. Now, let's see, there we are. Oh, they're back to talking about a government shutdown if I don't get the wall. Give him his wall. Give him the wall. But have American companies build it. This is a really sick statistic here. There's a mental health watchdog group, Citizens Commission on Human Rights, and they're pointing out now that our prescription medicine industrial complex is now so out of control. Here in the United States of America, there are over 1 million children under the age of 6 on prescription psychiatric medication. Half the kids are between 4 and 5 years old. Some of them are as young as a year old. They're giving babies these prescription psychiatric medications. These kids' myelin sheaths haven't even finished forming yet. Apparently, something like 4 million kids aged 6 to 12 are on some form of psychiatric medication. It's really out of control. And we know that these medications are not a blessing. They're not a benefit. They are in many cases quite harmful, and certainly in many cases highly addictive. Let's get them hooked young. Well, you know, why bother with that? Let's just shoot them up with heroin or meth. Turn them into addicts. Useful members of society that way. And part of the problem, and this is over at Blacklisted News, apparently 68,000 doctors have been bribed, for lack of a better word, by Big Pharma to the total of $47 million to describe dangerous painkiller drugs. Everyone was talking about the opioid crisis in this country. And we're not talking about the heroin dealers on the corner, street corner. We're talking about prescription opiates. And remember, there was these heads of this pharmaceutical company literally got caught and were prosecuted for incentivizing doctors to try and hook patients on these opiates, which are addictive. So there was this study out of the Boston Medical Center's Grayek Center for Addiction Medicine, was published in the American Journal of Public Health, and basically revealed that 1 out of every 12 American doctors has received at least one payment from an opioid pharmaceutical company to push their addictive products. It's getting harder and harder to tell the difference between these pharmaceutical corporations and the guy down on the street corner. Now, everybody is hopping on to Hurricane Harvey for their political agenda, and most notably the global warming people. See, we told you global warming would lead to big storms. No, it doesn't work that way. A temperature differential leads to big storms. And you can get a big storm as easily by upper atmosphere cooling as by a warming ground. And the proof of that is out there in the outer solar system, where you have the gas giant planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and they have huge storms, some of them the size of our entire planet, at temperatures hundreds of degrees below zero. But the global warmers are out there saying, see, the world has never been hotter. Well, that is not true, because yet another research project has confirmed that Earth was in fact much warmer during the medieval warming period. And Al Gore and his people want you to forget about that. They want you to forget about the Roman warming period and how not only did humankind survive, life was actually better because food was more abundant. It was that additional warmth and additional availability of food that allowed the Romans to turn their attention to building cities, discovering concrete. It was that warming and the abundance of food that allowed the Renaissance, that allowed work on science and art and architecture. These were golden ages for the human race when the earth was warmer. Early on, when that whole ClimateGate thing was coming on out, they actually caught some of these so-called climate researchers going in to Wikipedia and editing the articles on the Roman and medieval warming period to shave down how much warmer they were and to rewrite it to make it look like it wasn't any kind of a big deal. But a warmer world is actually better for humans, for ordinary people. If there's an abundance of food growing everywhere, then you're not forced to be dependent on supermarkets. We're going to take a break here for some commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're going to talk a little bit about computers. And unfortunately, one of the victims at the British National Health Service, Lanarkshire, was hit with WannaCrypt. And apparently they did not really take that lesson to heart because they have been infected and shut down by malware yet again. And as a reminder, we're dealing here with ransomware or any malware that attacks a hospital, places human lives at risk. And yet the continuing attitude we're seeing from NSA, FBI, CIA, law enforcement in general is, it's not a big deal. It's only when they attack our computers that we're going to really get upset here. But it is amazingly out of control. And as far as the anti-malware software companies, they're losing the fight. They're losing the fight. Now, apparently there is a new viral app called Saraha, and apparently it secretly steals your entire contact list. Supposedly this is one of the hottest iPhone and Android apps over the last couple of weeks, and basically it's a device to send anonymous messages between Saraha users back and forth. But in the process, it's uploading your phone contacts to the company's servers for no reason whatsoever other than to find out who you're talking to, which suggests to me this is an intelligence operation. This malware was put out by CIA, NSA, somebody of that ilk, in order to build up networks of who's talking to who. It's called traffic analysis. And it's a way of gleaning intelligence data about people without having to actually listen to the calls or read the messages, which I'm sure they're capable of doing anyway. But that's the only reason to be grabbing everybody's contact list, is to try and build a map of who is talking to who. Now, here is the fly in the ointment. How many telemarketer calls do you get? How many wrong numbers do you get? So, I don't want anybody to know who my contacts are. It's none of their business. But that's the only explanation I can figure. It's a spy operation to just build this gigantic global map of who is talking to who. Now, back before 9/11, there was this big stink about these Israeli companies that were building telephone infrastructure for the United States and the United States government. And one of the companies basically did billing for all of the phone companies in the United States, which sounds innocuous, except that that also gave them the ability to build a map of who was talking to who on the American phone system. This sounds like the next generation up, because it's on the cell phones here. But you know, I've got people in my contact list that I haven't communicated with in years, if not decades. There are people on my contacts list who have passed away, and I just haven't had the heart to delete them. So once again, it's a flawed approach. I'm sure somebody's getting a lot of money to do this, and they'll be out there saying, absolutely, this is guaranteed to work. We'll stop those terrorists. And it's another government boondoggle. Now, we've been talking about how YouTube is pulling the plug on monetization of videos based on their political content. It was never an issue for me because YouTube has never allowed my videos, Claire's videos, to be monetized. But apparently they have pulled the plug on Ron Paul, the former U.S. congressman, former presidential candidate, has had YouTube yank his monetization, because apparently YouTube has decided that Ron Paul's Liberty Report videos are not suitable for all advertisers. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm looking on Fox News at all this devastation down there in Texas. And I do empathize with these people. And again, when I was a kid living in New Hampshire, I got to see a flood up close and personal. Didn't hit our home. We were okay, but other sections of the town we lived in were hit by it. So it's not just the damage to the house and the car. It's the psychic shock that something as permanent as the building you live in, or the school you go to, or the store you do business with, in fact, the whole town, can just all of a sudden be erased. So, again, my sympathies to those people. All right, back onto the computer news. By the way, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443 if you want to call on in. So we're talking about how YouTube all of a sudden decided Ron Paul's Liberty Report was not appropriate for YouTube's advertisers, and they yanked the monetization off of that. And YouTube, I think, is getting too big for their britches on this issue. And I do think that we are seeing this full court press by the corporate-owned social media to impose the government's agenda on us all by altering the search engine results, by simply demonetizing people that they don't agree with. Apparently, Joy Villa has been given 48 hours to remove his Make America Great Again song for, quote, violating YouTube standards, end quote. Apparently, Making America Great Again is considered offensive. Of course, that was the response we were getting when Trump first came on out with that. Oh, how racist, how nationalist, how Nazi. You know, this is the age of the rise of the globalism. Now, we had a caller who called in a little while ago regarding the Stormfront website being shut down, their domain name provider or their ISP, or somebody just said, we don't want to have you on here. And it is the right of any store business to refuse service to anybody that they want, unless, of course, you're a baker who makes wedding cakes and you refuse to make one for a gay couple, at which point you'll be sued out of existence. But apparently, Germany has now closed the Indie Media website. And they were able to get around Germany's existing laws on freedom of speech by declaring Indie Media an association rather than a news outlet. And so they were able to circumvent the constitutional protection of free expression, which appears to be banned by Merkel's right-wing regime. Now remember, Germany has already passed a law saying that if there is an attack by a refugee migrant on the German people, the regular media cannot identify the perpetrator. And maybe that's the reason why that horrible gang rape in Italy was reported to the world media the way it was, where the perpetrators were not named or described. In fact, it's not even clear they've even been arrested. Only that one newspaper in Italy indicated that they were migrants. Now, I had somebody who wrote into me after my talk about constantly getting credit card solicitations in the mail, saying that they're the same thing. They're on a fixed income. They're getting by, but they absolutely do not want to have a credit card because they don't know for a fact they can pay it off, which a lot of people are in that. And all of a sudden, I had this flash. Remember back in 2007 when the big thing was the subprime mortgage? We're going to give mortgages to people we're not 100% certain can pay them back, but it doesn't really matter because we're going to bundle them all together, and it's going to be an investment instrument that will make money, and if there's a few defaults inside there, you're still going to be into profits. The mortgage-backed security. And we saw what that led to, the crash of 2008. And now we're seeing that same kind of thing where they're bundling home security contracts, amazingly enough. The subprime car loan, and those are being bundled. And there's the subprime student loans, many of them are. Those are being bundled. And all of a sudden I'm starting to wonder. They're offering credit cards to just about anybody. Are they playing the same game? Has there been a breaking of the securitization chain where the companies that are getting people to sign those credit agreements aren't responsible for them being paid off? They're simply forwarded along to a bundler. And these credit card accounts are now being sold as a financial instrument. And have they not really learned anything from their past mistakes? Well, no, because every time one of these things blows up, who gets to pay for it? You and me and the rest of ordinary American people, because that's how life is under fascism. When the big corporations lose money, the people are forced to cover those losses here. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Rob in Illinois, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Rob, are you there?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
I hear you now.
All righty, very good. Sometimes you get that when you switch over, it gets that pause. So when I talk or anybody talks, it misses that
Yes.
gap there. You know, they know what they're doing. It's not a lesson that they haven't learned. They know what they're doing. They're taking the money off the table and then letting everyone else eat the consequences later. It's not a matter of do they know what they're doing? Will they learn their lesson? No, their lesson is we do this, we get wealthy, everyone else suffers. That's the moral.
Well, as long as the government goes along with that, it's going to continue. And you need to understand, when this nation started to get into economic trouble, the President Bush needed to send a message. Herbert Walker Bush needed to send a message to foreign investors: your money will be safe here, because if you make money, you get to take it home. If you lose money, we will we will make the American taxpayer cover the losses, so you can't lose your money here. And the first demonstration of that, of course, was the savings and loan collapse, where the American taxpayer covered all the losses to save those widows and children, and actually they were saving corporate accounts, and some of them were being used as money laundering, money doubling devices by the CIA. And that was the demonstration to the rest of the world. Yes, we're running a fascist economic investment here. You can put your money here, and it'll be perfectly safe. If you make a profit, you get to keep it. But you can't lose any money, because the American people will cover those losses. And yes, it's intentional.
Right. This isn't why I called in, but it does tie into this. I don't know if I heard it. If you were talking about it or somebody else, I listen to so many programs or broadcasts every day that this stuff gets, whoever was talking about it. But this also ties into why they ended up upping the ante of going after people's guns and whatnot, is because these foreign investors didn't think their money was safe here, because the American people had the right to bear arms. And
Yes.
the right to bear arms, the more the government taxed us, and if they figured it out, then these foreign investors are like, oh, wait a minute, they'll just stand up against the government, and we lost our money. So that's when they started going up against these militias and going up against creating these new gun laws and going after the Second Amendment, because these foreign investors all around the world, we set a bad example for the rest of the world. We have free speech and we have a Second Amendment, which we're a bad influence for the rest of the world. And they didn't like that, and that's why they didn't think their money was safe here. Okay?
Okay.
And you know what? I heard it on, they were talking about it on the Common Sense show yesterday. freedomsphoenix.com is the guy that was talking about it. But anyway, Joy Villa is a she, and that's the woman, the pop singer who showed up at the Grammys. Remember, she made the big splash when she wore the Make America Great Again dress?
Yes, now I remember. Now I remember.
They're all shaming her, and it turned out that the guy that designed it for her was her gay designer, who was Asian or Filipino or something of the sort. And Joy Villa, she's mixed race, and she's a patriot. She loves America, and she's one of those few people in Hollywood and all that was actually getting out from the crowd, because everyone else was, because anyone that's in Hollywood or the pop music industry, they have to hide. If they say, oh, we love America and so on, they get blacklisted.
Yes.
Like right now, Antonio Sabato Jr., he's running for Senate, and he can't get an acting job ever again because he's running for Senate. He's speaking about how America is great and, be a patriot and,
Yeah, and it's such a shock here, because when I was a kid growing up in New Hampshire, and of course when you're growing up in that part of the country and you have the ancestry I had on my mother's side of the family, the American Revolution is actually family history. It's local history. It's right there in front of you. And we were encouraged by the media, by the schools, by our families to be proud in our nation, to be proud in America, to be proud of the flag, that being a patriot was a good thing. And all of a sudden we're in this age here where all of a sudden they're trying to shame anybody who wants to put their own nation for as the highest priority. No, you can't do that. You have to think, globalism. And we're seeing these people who are standing up and wanting to say, I want to make America great again. They're being attacked. And more it's coming from these voices who have been allowed in through these open borders, who understand that if nationalism does have a resurgence here in the United States, that we're going to close those borders and we're going to start throwing these people out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's a whole list of things to talk about, but our time is short. I want to direct your listeners. I don't know how many listeners just tune in and hear your show, but Republic Broadcasting Network has a lot of good hosts and broadcasting hosts, including yourself, on this network. And I would like to point to them on Sunday nights. There's a dude called Robert Raybolt. Mm-hmm. He does a great show, 10 p.m. Central. I believe he's got a 4-hour show. And then there's Ralph Winthrop, Sunday evenings. He talks a lot about Constitution, contracts, the different loopholes, which I thought of him when you're like, well, I own my car. It's paid off. While Ralph Winthrop and others will tell you, you do not own that car. Yes, you bought it, you purchased it, you had it on your credit, you might have paid it off, but technically you do not own it. The sadness of it is like if you paid off your house, you do not own your house. Try not paying your property taxes. See how long you own it. You know what I mean?
I see that point. Yes.
Good. Yeah, see, that's good with Ralph Winthrop. So maybe some people don't have access to the internet or whatnot, but I also remind people that they can get to the archives even through the phone lines from what I heard. So if they want to investigate that and check it out, they'd be well informed.
Okay, well, thank you for that. But, at least let me put it this way. My Honda is paid off. That's one less party that can come on in and grab it. And I hesitate to say nobody would have a reason for taking it, but then I was saying that right up to the day some joyriders stole it and broke that.
Yeah, your previous caller had a good point. Now, this how many tens of thousands of cars got lost in this Houston deal? So that's going to be a thrust in they're going to get rid of some inventory for that. So unfortunately, people are going to have to look out. A lot of those cars are going to be hitting the sales papers, and you might be picking up lemons that were flooded. So everyone's going to be aware of that in the future. There's one pertinent question I had to ask you, Mike.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Red Cross earlier. Now, is the Red Cross still, is it, I don't know. We know the Red Cross, okay? We want to believe in the Red Cross, but are they still a good organization to donate to? Are they doing the good work that they're saying they would be doing in their mission statement?
Unfortunately, the Red Cross has in fact been hit by numerous scandals throughout the years of misappropriation of the money. But at this particular point, apparently they do have supplies they're sending on in. Frankly, if you are of a mood to help out the people in Houston, I would go down and actually look for some charities that are operating out of the local churches in Houston and various places like that. Because the reality is, in this day and age, there are a lot of charities where most of the money that you donate winds up not actually helping the people who need it. It's used up in administrative fees and so forth and so on. Claire and I, we're involved here on Oahu, and we basically give directly to the programs that are actually helping the community. So I would definitely go with something small and local in Houston at this particular point. Again, because of all the negative scandals that have come on out about the Red Cross through the years.
Right. I was particularly interested in the Red Cross because we know that, like, when we donate to these charities, it's like 10 cents out of every dollar, if that, goes to actually helping the cause that they said they're going to help. And what you just brought up, going locally, that's what Vincent Finelli tells you on RBN. He has a morning show here Monday through Friday. And he says, he looks for local communities. If he can give directly to people, he'll do that over anything else. But giving these organizations, you don't know what they're doing with their money. Most of the money, too often, is going to the people that are, the president and vice president and the bookkeeper, and everything else is getting lost in the mix. And, the percentage of money that's actually going to the cause is it's minuscule. So if you can find, and people should take your advice, find something local, vet them out, and go that route, and it'll help a lot more people than going through these organizations. But let's hope Red Cross is doing what we hope they're doing. So,
well, at
all
least,
right, Mike,
at least
I appreciate your time.
Okay, at least in terms of what was in their warehouses on the East Coast, it is on the way, and we have to give them credit where credit is due on that situation. We're going to switch over here to Don in Iowa. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Don, are you there?
Hello.
Hello, Don. You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Yeah, he stole my thunder. I was going to tell you about Joy Villa being a woman.
Okay, well, yeah, I blew that one definitely, but once he described her at the Grammys, yeah, I remember who she is. Do you have any?
Yeah, she had that famous gown. But I could make a comment about these drugs. This thing about these little kids taking drugs. I mean, that's totally out of line. Those kids will never.
It's child abuse. It's child abuse. These kids may grow up with serious mental problems because of this chemical assault on them, all in the name of a fast buck.
They're ruined. And that's one thing I like about Trump. They say he never takes a pill. He won't take an aspirin. So that, despite all his faults, at least he's that alone makes him a pretty good guy, I think.
Well, I don't know. That almost sounds like George Washington. I cannot tell a lie here. I mean, I don't think he wants to be.
He doesn't drink. He doesn't take any drugs, and he doesn't take aspirin. He doesn't smoke pot. He doesn't do anything like that.
All right. Well, Don, we're going to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here. And yes, they're starting to pound on this North Korea threat. How dare they fire a missile over Japan? Well, again, go look at a map. It's kind of hard for them to fire a missile in any direction that's going to have a long range that isn't going to fly over Japan. And every nation that puts anything in orbit is technically launching that over other people's territory. But yeah, this is the latest reason to try and fan up a war against North Korea. It's pretty amazing. Now, over the last, couple of decades, especially since 2008, a lot of very strange deaths involved in the financial sector. A lot of people who seem to be at the height of their success, and all of a sudden they're falling off of parking garages. And apparently we've had another one today. Apparently this 40-year-old lady, Lindsay Jacoby, jumped around 10:30 a.m. from the fourth floor roof at 12 Henderson Place, which was her luxury Upper East Side home. She was married, and apparently Jacoby and her husband purchased this home in 2014 for $3.6 million, so they're doing okay. She had worked in the past at J.P. Morgan and Citigroup, as well as her own company. Now, here's where it gets a little bizarre. 7 months ago, there was the wife of a wealthy investment banking CEO, Margaret Fagenson, who jumped to her death from a 14th floor terrace literally across the street from the building where Lindsay Jacoby jumped or was pushed today. So, kind of interesting stuff out there. Apparently over in Great Britain, there was this tourist place, Beachy Head, and all of a sudden there was this weird chemical mist that blew in from the ocean, and it started burning people's eyes, and they had difficulty breathing, and they had to basically go to the hospital. Some of them were vomiting, and a total of 233 people required treatment following the mystery haze at Beachy Head. It sounds suspiciously like somebody had an accident out at sea with a chemical weapon. like some form, like CS tear gas will do that. Now, we've talked in the past before about peanut anaphylaxis possibly being caused by the use of peanut oil as a vaccine adjuvant. Well, there's a little bit of good news coming out of Australia, because apparently they've discovered or developed a probiotic treatment that is able to erase peanut allergy in 70% of children. Doesn't work on them all, but it works on 70%. And when you look at how many hundreds of Americans die each year from peanut reactions, this is a good thing. All right, there's the music. I got to get on out of here and do the Jim Goddard Show up in Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, please share what you learn here with everybody you can. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller's program. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.